For this week, in talking about diversity of denominations, I'll be covering the Ukrainian Catholic Church in America. It got its roots back in 989 when it was influenced by missionaries of the Patriarch of Constantinople, and it broke from the Catholic Church in the Great Schism in the 11th century and then rejoined it back in 1595. After 300 years of schism and separation, many of those texts had to be altered in order to be welcomed back into the Roman Church. And from 1595, there was a constant shift towards the Latinization of the rite until Pope Leo XIII halted the changes, saying that it was important to preserve the unique traditions of the Ukrainian rite. The 19th century saw many immigrants, over 400,000 between 1880 and 1955, immigrate into the United States due to being pushed out by communist Russia. Many of those immigrants suffered either being imprisoned or killed, or they had to immigrate. There was a priest, Achiel Delare, who was one of the few Ukrainian rite priests that emigrated. He was one of very few that was not killed or arrested. He immigrated into Canada, and in Jamie S. Scott's The Religions of Canada, the author outlines the hardships the Ukrainians suffered upon reaching a land without a shepherd. They faced challenges from other religions and immigrants of America. They suffered a linguistic gap, both in liturgy and in practice of everyday life. And they also suffered other economic troubles, but they were not afforded the same amount of money that other Catholic churches were in the United States. The Ukrainian church would not be assigned a bishop by Rome until 1907, when the Pope sent Sotier Ortosky, who had to split time between the Ukrainian and the Ruthenian rite. And when he died in 1924, Bishop Konstantin Wojciechowski was appointed, and he helped to bridge that gap between the Latin and the Ukrainian rites, trying to bring understanding. And not until 1944 was the rite finalized by Andrei Shepchevsky in a document called Ordo Celebrationis, which is ironically a Latin name. In 1945, the last bishop in Ukraine was either killed or imprisoned, so there were no patriarchs left in the Ukraine, and the Ukrainian Rite Catholic Church had to rely solely on its United States establishment. Because of the ousting from their homeland, they were left with very much on their own, and it was not until 1954 that their rites were written and published for official use in their native tongue in Philadelphia, following the Divine Liturgy of St. John Chrysostom. This brought about the finalization of the 1944 work for full acceptance and use. In 1958, the Philadelphia See was finally elevated to the Metropolitan Archiepiscopal See. And today, even though the Ukrainian Rite battled against the Latinization for centuries, the Ukrainian Rite enjoys a distinct difference in cultural practices of sacraments, altar linens, iconoclasts instead of statues, and priestly vestments. Cardinal Yosef Slipchev was released from Soviet prison to attend the Vatican II Ecumenical Council in the 1960s, and he aided the Ukrainian Rite's validation and its legitimacy by speaking with Pope John the 23rd and Pope Pius VI. Pius VI and John Paul II, who himself was a victim of the Soviet Union himself, greatly aided the Catholic Church in the acceptance of the differences during his papacy. In 1989, after the Soviet Union withdrew from much of Eastern Europe and the Ukrainian Catholic Church was reestablished in Ukraine, and in 1991, John Paul II promulgated the Code of Canon Law for Eastern Catholic churches, providing normative universal laws for all Eastern rites. It recognized the diversity of the church, giving it its own unique identity, while still in full communion with Rome. This caused a sort of de-Latinization in the United States and a renewal of almost century-old traditions of the old unused rites of baptism, confirmation, and Eucharist. And most significantly, in 1996, there was published the Instruction for Applying the Liturgical Prescription of the Code of Canons of the Eastern Churches. This helped all of the Eastern rites fully realize their own identity. In conclusion, the Ukrainian Catholic Church in the United States, though not a significant historical bookmark on the American Christian church history, it preserved the rituals, customs, and practices of the pre-Soviet era for over a century, lending to the preservation of the rite and the abdication then back to the Ukraine upon the Soviet Union's withdrawal. So the United States Ukrainian Rite helped preserve the national or the international Ukrainian Rite for all Ukrainian Catholics.